Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation.
I know it doesn't feel like it, but I can tell you that today is a very, very, very big day on markets. I don't know if you guys know this, but we see that Trump seems to have attacked Powell, by this time serving potentially criminal subpoenas against Chair Powell. And even though it doesn't feel like it right now, this is a very, very, very big day for markets. When we look at the charts today, the markets haven't moved a lot, but let me assure you that it's a very, very, very big day for markets, and that the markets should move on this news, and that some markets actually are moving on this news. And I think today we need to dive deeper into what this is actually all about and how markets should actually play out about it. So today's got a much more macro show, because what's happening today is much, much, much more macro, but it does have crypto implications, and we should look at the crypto implications and see why the markets aren't moving or whether the markets will move going forward. So big show today. Let's get going, guys. So I know it doesn't look like it or doesn't feel like it when you look at the charts, but it's a really big day for markets today. And what happened today is pretty much unprecedented. And we're going to look deeper into what this is actually all about, because as far as I know, we've never had federal prosecutors going into a Fed chair, or basically investigating a Fed chair. So what is this thing actually all about, and how is it all actually going to play out? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Big show today. If you're not already subscribe to the channel. If you are subscribed, do me a favor, smash the like button. It really helps with distribution, and we work really hard. Even though the crypto market isn't really firing a lot, it makes us work much harder to actually bring you guys the fresh content every single day. And today we're going to dig into some really fresh content. So what is this all about, and where did this whole thing actually start? So as you can see, federal prosecutors opened an inquiry into Fed Chair Powell. Now that headline, as you can see, came out on the 12th of January 2026, but that's not the whole story. So if you look here, it says the U.S. Attorney's Office in District of Columbia opened a criminal investigation into Fed Chair Powell over the central banks of its Washington headquarters. Now, it's not really about the Washington headquarters, right? It's much more around Powell, and I want to show you exactly where this stems from. So you will remember that Powell was testifying in front of the Senate banking panel in June 2025. So last year in June 2025, Powell was testifying in front of the Senate, and this question actually came up.
I did want to touch on one item. The chairman mentioned it, and I think it's important. I know that you didn't mention it in your opening statement, but would you talk a little bit about just exactly what's going on with your building? When you have that type of an overrun on the prices and you're talking about billions of dollars in costs, I think it's appropriate for you to be able to explain to the committee exactly what's going on. Would you take a few minutes, please, and explain what's going on with...
So the history is that the Fed is renovating their building, or a series of buildings, and in June 2025, Powell was prodded around the renovation of the building, and the fact that it was then blown up by the media to be portrayed to be a very lavish renovation of this building, which was running over time and over budget. So listen to this.
The value of that building and why the costs seem to be so exorbitant.
I'd be glad to if I can have that time. So
please.
Thank you for the letter we received late yesterday. We will provide a much more detailed response, but just generally, I would just say we do take seriously our responsibility as stewards of the public's money. And the other thing I would start with is no one in office wants to do a major renovation of a historic building during their term in office. You much prefer to leave that to your successors. And this is a great example why, let alone two historic buildings that needed a lot of work. But we decided to take it on because, honestly, when I was the administrative governor before I came chair, I came to understand how badly the Eccles building really needed a serious renovation. It never had one. It was not really safe, and it was not waterproof and that kind of thing. So we took it on. I would also say that the media reports that you accurately quoted, they're misleading and inaccurate in many, many respects. And I would just point to, there's no VPI dining room. There's no new marble. We took down the old marble. We're putting it back up. We'll have to use new marble where some of the old marble broke, but there's no new, there are no special elevators.
This is where it
they're
starts
old
getting
elevators
important.
that have
Listen
been
to
there. There are no new water features. There's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace gardens. Other than that, so all of the sort of inflammatory things that the media carried are either not in the current plan or just inaccurate. So, but notwithstanding that, the cost overruns are what they are. So let me just say on that.
Well, we're well over the 5-minute mark. I'm happy to give you time to talk about that. I'm happy.
So get this. So what happened is that the media published an article not long before this testimony at the Senate committee in June last year, where they accused the Fed of having a massive building upgrade in very, very, very tough times. And that they talked about new marble, beehives, VIP lounges, big elevators, etc., etc. And what Powell says here is that they denied it. He's basically denying, saying, look, this is not a lavish upgrade. It's just a normal upgrade, which we pretty much needed to do. Now, note that this is on a 2-hour testimony. This is in minute 21, right? This is in minute 21. Later on, and note how the chairman, Mr. Scott, note how he already has this information, which means that when they came here, they were prepared to talk about this building upgrade. And that's a very, very, very important bit of information, because I'll show you how that all fits into the puzzle. So the one senator actually brought it up, and now you'll see how the other senator basically has the information and starts prodding Powell and knows a lot about what there is and what there isn't, and where there are overruns and where they're not overruns, which means that before they got to this testimony, they knew and they planned that they were going to they knew and they planned that they were going to prod Powell about the building, the overruns on the building, and effectively to try and trap him. So listen to this.
Giving us an opportunity to go back to the
So this is 9 minutes later. So 21 minutes we spoke about. This is 9 minutes later in the same testimony. 9 minutes later, this is what happens.
The Fed for the construction, and you said that the items that were listed are not happening. I will say that the National Capital Planning Commission website, ncpc.gov, anyone can take a look at it for themselves, not just looking or listening to the New York Post, not just the Wall Street Journal, but page 129 of the final plans reflected rooftop garden terraces. The page 127 and 129 were where we found the ornate water features and final plans. The new elevators that dropped board members off at the VIP dining suite was page 37 of the final plans. The white marble was pages 40, 41, 65 of the final plans. I would welcome your staff coming in to walk my staff through what is happening there, as opposed to what we not have only read in the New York Post, not only in the Wall Street Journal, but also at the National Capital Planning Commission's website. But we would welcome that opportunity to have a
Can I just quickly say, some of those are just flatly misleading. The idea of elevators, it's the same elevator. It's been there since the building was built. So that's a mischaracterization. And some of those are no longer in the plans. That's earlier. The plans have continued to evolve.
That was one of the questions I asked my staff before having the conversation with you in the preparation, and assuming that your response would be to refute some of the things that were happening, was to ask the question, well, since the articles came out in April, have the plans changed since April as a result of the media attention to it, or was that just never in the plan? I would just say that having an understanding, a clear understanding of what's going to be and when it changed would be helpful for us. I will note that having confidence in what we hear is incredibly important, and I would give you the opportunity to bring your team in or send your team over so that we can have that conversation. That would be helpful.
Look forward to doing that.
remember that Powell is under oath here, and that he has to answer this honestly and truthfully. And if not, then he can go to jail because of perjury. And that's a criminal
And if you'll allow me to say
investigation.
one more sentence, none of those things were the cost drivers. You know, the real thing is what were the cost drivers that caused the spending to increase, and we have those too, but those are not the things that did that.
Well, I don't want to
We look forward to the conversation.
I don't want to eat into Bernie Moreno.
Remember that when Powell was here and he was testifying in front of the Senate committee, he was doing it under oath. And when you're under oath, you have to answer honestly, truthfully, and correctly. And you can see that they caught him off guard here. And he said, look, I'm not sure there are elevators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then what happened was Scott and Trump visited the Fed building to see the renovations. I don't know if you guys remember this, but this is quite an iconic clip and an iconic moment.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about 3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well,
including
no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built.
So this was the whole squabble around the whole renovation. And the whole thing about this thing is that it's actually not about the renovation and overrunning on the renovation, because they're not actually accusing Powell of fraud or maybe appointing his own contractors or maybe building his own house, etc., etc. All they're getting him here is about the fact that he was dishonest in his testimony under oath, and that is effectively perjury. And perjury in the US is effectively a criminal offense. And that is all they're going after. That is what they're going after Powell for. So now you've got to ask yourself, what the hell is actually going on here? And I think what we need to pay attention to is the following. Up until now, we know that Powell and Trump have a very, very, very strained relationship. Trump has always been pretty vocal and pretty abusive around Powell, calling him too late Powell, saying that he's a bad central banker, and really, really, really trying to pressure him or trying to bully him into reducing rates. That is how the relationship's been. And up until now, even though Trump has been vocal and he's threatened him with passive aggressiveness, he said, look, Powell's reappointment to the Federal Reserve might be nullified because it was instituted by Biden's autopen, even though actually Trump was the one who actually nominated nominated Powell for the Federal Reserve job. He said, by the end of the year, we want to get too late Powell out. We want to be early, etc., etc. And up until now, what you've seen is that Powell has always been very, very professional, and he's always really exercised restraint in how he deals with President Trump. But that changed yesterday, because yesterday, before the news headlines actually came out, is when Powell came out with this statement. And I think we need to listen to the statement quickly, because it's about a minute, but it's well worth listening to the statement and where he gets quite aggressive here.
On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand juries.
The first thing we need to understand is that this came out, they were served with these subpoenas on Friday, and this video and the news only came out on Sunday, which means that during the weekend, Powell and his advisor said, look, we received these criminal subpoenas, or these subpoenas which usually preempt criminal action, and we need to know what to do. And they thought, and by Sunday they realized that the best course of action would be for them to actually publicize it before the president actually publicizes it.
Subpoenas threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public.
This is where the thing. This is now where Powell is accusing Trump of saying, you're coming after me because I'm not listening to you in terms of policy. And this is a direct pushback from Powell. Up until now, Powell's been very, very calculated and very, very, very professional. But now he's basically coming out and saying, you're going after me, and you're going after me because I refuse to lower interest rates. And Powell published this first because he wants the world to know this,
rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions.
This is about the future of the Fed and whether the Fed can remain independent of politics.
Instead, monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. I have served at the Federal Reserve under 4 administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike. In every case, I have carried out my duties without political fear or favor, focused solely on our mandate of price stability and maximum employment. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people.
So let's look at what's actually going on here. This is the first time that Powell's actually come out and been vocal and been confrontational with President Trump. And he's basically saying, look, I am not going to be intimidated by these tactics, and your tactics are actually about trying to influence, are not because you really believe that I did perjury. And to be honest, even if he did perjure about something so small, that's not really important. This is about the fact that Powell wouldn't reduce rates, and Trump's upset, and Trump's basically going after Powell. Now, you've got to ask yourself the next question here. And the next question is, we know that in May this year, which is 5 months away or 4 months away, we know that a new Fed chair is appointed. And that new Fed chair is appointed by Trump. And so you kind of want to ask yourself, why is this happening right now? Why? What do they actually want from Powell? Surely they're not doing this to pressure him to reducing rates, because 4 months before he's about to leave, and with probably 2 or 3 Fed chair meetings to go, this is not really a good tactic. But what I was reading here is that actually, even though his Fed chair term ends on the 15th of May 2026, but his term as governor only ends in January 31st, 2028, which means that even though he won't be the chair of the Fed, he'll still be a governor at the Fed until 2028. And then I asked ChatGPT, I said, look, if he is a governor, then what are his roles here? And a governor still has a lot of votes. Like, he still vote on interest rates at the FOMC meetings. He still has a lot of influence. He'll still be influencing policy direction. And the thing around Powell's influence is that if you look at the approval ratings, actually, Powell's got the highest approval rating out of any, if you want to call it, political leader in the country, even higher than Donald Trump. He's got a 44, I don't know if it's a percent or whatever it is, 44% approval rating, but that's one of the highest. So he's still very, very, very influential. And I think what Trump wants to do is that Trump wants him to get out before the end of his term, or at least at the end of his term, and he doesn't want him to stay there until the end of January 2020. I think it was 2028, if I'm not mistaken, where 2028, yes, where he remains on the board. And I think that's pretty much what's going on here. Now, this is why did I say it's a big day for markets? Because this is actually pretty scary. And the reason why it's pretty scary is because in the US, the one thing about the Fed is supposed to be independent. The Fed is not supposed to be a political tool, and it is supposed to be non-partisan. It's supposed to be a non-partisan body, and it is supposed to be a body that operates independently of the president. And as 𝗂𝗄𝗆 says here, he says, absolutely extraordinary moment, whether you like the Fed or not. Their independence is one of the central features of the United States. If they become a puppet of the executive office, we could be seeing interest rates go very, 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 very low. And that's exactly what the logical explanation here, right? As Shanaka says, OBA says, for 113 years, Fed chairs could defy presidents without facing prosecutions. But on January 9th, that ended because Powell said that the DOJ's probe threatens the Fed's independence and is directly linked to his refusal to follow through on Trump's interest rates demands. Senator Tom Tiller says, if there was any remaining doubt as to whether advisors within the Trump administration are actively pushing to end the independence of the Federal Reserve, there should be none now. It is now the independence and credibility of the Department of Justice that are in question. So he's basically saying that that Trump is trying to implement to influence the Fed. And now the question is, what will happen at the Department of Justice? Will the Department of Justice also go towards the president, or will they actually remain independent? Lastly, Henrik Seeberg says, the Fed is terribly late, but its decisions and actions must remain out of the control of the executive branch and the Congress. This is the only thing which prevents everything from running amok. If markets begin to believe that the U.S. administration just prints whatever it needs, the U.S. monetary regime collapses. So disagreeing with the Fed is fine, but putting legal pressure to cut rates is not the best way forward. For the Fed. And this is why I think this is such a pivotal moment. So this is exactly why Bitcoin was created. And the reason why I say that is because if the US president can unilaterally control the printing of the dollar and the policies that control the movement of the dollar by influencing the Fed, then it means that the US is not as strong as the US is, and that it is effectively, this is a kink in the armor of the US. And so what you would expect, and what we all expected this morning, as Will Clemente says, this environment is literally what Bitcoin was created for. The president is going after the Fed. Metals are ripping as sovereigns diversify reserves. Stock and risk assets at record all-time highs. Geopolitical risk rising. If Bitcoin can't catch a bid, then I don't know. And so what actually happened this morning when this actually happened? Well, the first thing is actually Bitcoin did catch a bid, but only for like a couple of hours. Bitcoin went to about 92,000. And why? Because, again, this is exactly what Bitcoin was created for. But then let's look at some of the other charts. The first thing is that the 𝗥𝗡𝗄 weakened by about 0.5%. Now that doesn't sound like a big drop, but when the 𝗥𝗡𝗄 weakens, the dollar index weakens by 0.5%, that is actually quite a big and quite an unprecedented drop. And that just shows that what the world is basically saying is we trust the US dollar because of the independence of the Fed. And if President Trump is going to interfere here, and if there is a chance that the Fed is not independent, then that's quite a big thing, right? But then we look at some of the other precious metals, and you can see that what happened was gold went to all-time highs, silver went to all-time highs, copper went to all-time highs on this announcement. And the one thing that didn't actually run was actually Bitcoin. Now you've got to ask yourself a whole lot of questions as to why that's actually happening, because this is the very reason why Bitcoin was created. The whole thing about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin was created around or to protect you or to give you sound money that is not reliant on governments. And as governments seem to be interfering with their currencies, then logically we would expect that would be the ideal time for Bitcoin. And it wasn't. And the same thing when you look at US equity markets. You would expect that if the US, if this is what's going on in the US, that the US equity markets and the futures would absolutely collapse. And the truth is, they didn't actually collapse. And so all we're seeing now is that the market is quite apathetic towards this, funnily enough, and that they're not panicking in any way about this. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it is that they're not taking this very seriously, or I'm not really sure the reason why. But what I can tell you is that ultimately all this is doing is pushing more fire into the commodity super cycle, which is basically going on. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the commodity super cycle, because if I look at this tweet over here and I look at like the commodities, basically what I can see is that silver is up in the last 1 year 170%, platinum's up another 140%, palladium's up 95%, gold's up 66%, copper's up 38%, and the S&P is up 34 and 22%. And what I thought about here is I'm like, we are here in crypto. And we are supposed to be getting these massive runs and this massive bull market. And what I'm seeing that is playing out is like, if you look at gold is acting like Bitcoin. And if you look at silver and you look at all the other commodities, they're pretty much acting like the altcoins. And what seems to be happening is that we seem to be having a Bitcoin altcoin market. You know, like we have the market cycle plays where you have like Bitcoin, then Bitcoin goes to ETH, and then ETH goes to large cap altcoins, and then we go to the small cap altcoins, that whole market flow. Well, it seems like the same thing's actually happening in commodities. So whilst nothing is happening in the crypto markets, and we've been between 88 and 95 for the last, 2-3 months, what is actually happening in commodities is exactly what we'd expect in our markets. I mean, just look at what's going on here. So gold has gone up like 40% or 60%. And in a period where gold's gone up 60%, silver's gone up 200% to 170%. Doesn't that remind you of if Bitcoin goes up 66%, you'd kind of expect ETH in the old days to go up 200%. And then you can see that all the other commodities have started to run. You had platinum up 140%, you had palladium up. You've got copper, which is absolutely ripping, right? And there's a reason why I want to show you this. So yeah. I mean, just look at this. Look at the CFDs on copper. Just look at where we are from. Let's just pick from 2024. So let's just say from the bottom of October 23 to today, copper's up 70%. So why am I telling you this? Because we know how market cycles play out. We know that they go from the safe asset to the slightly less safe asset to the highly speculative assets as the flow happens. Now, it feels to me like the same thing's happening in commodities right now, right? Commodities seem to have found the ultimate bid. What is that bid? That bid is about, number one, the real store of value, the traditional store of value. Gold is the traditional store of value. And that has found, that has been running for a while. Straight after that had run for a while and the commodity market got confidence, then silver started running. That was like, you can almost say the ETH. And then after that, all the other ones started to run. So you're getting the ultimate play here. Why? Because you've got the risk diversification play where the big money is allocated to the safest asset. And then once the safest asset shows confidence in the market, which is what gold did for about 2 years, then the money started flowing into the more speculative commodities assets. And that's where the big returns are coming in. And now the returns are starting to move to things like uranium and copper and whatever else. And ultimately, what I'm starting to see is a super cycle happening in the commodities. I mean, I've obviously been part of the cycle, but what I didn't realize is that we may be getting the ultimate cycle here. Why? Because it's the combination of a speculative bubble and a speculative trade, let's not say bubble, and the fact that we actually need in the new age, in the age of AI, and in the age of data centers and everything, you actually do need these commodities. So just listen to what 𝗪𝗪𝗪 actually said here.
Business winner for 2026 after yourself.
I will pick copper.
Okay, copper.
We are still completely underestimating how short we are in terms of the global demand supply dynamics of a handful of critical elements that we need. Again, in the Trump doctrine view of the world, that is no longer as multilateral as it was, and we need to have unilateral national security. And if you look through that lens, the asset that is set up to go absolutely parabolic is copper. And the reason is that it is, at least as it stands today, the most useful, cheap, amenable, conductive material that we have. That material manifests in everything from our data centers to our chips to our weapon systems. It's just everywhere. And right
so
now,
what you're seeing is you're seeing that these assets that actually have real use cases and we need them in AI and data centers and drones and whatever else have actually really found a bid. And at the same time, this is when people are flocking to the store of value. So you've almost got the Bitcoin of commodities, which is gold, shooting up. Bitcoin seems to have slowed down or topped, and now the flow of money is starting to flow down. And there's a lot of money to be made in these things. Actually, I noticed that some influencers that used to make crypto content, or still make crypto content, like Ben Cowan, for example, is starting to make content on uranium. Like, is uranium a good long-term investment? Which is quite surprising, but ultimately, And that's what's going on. He says gold and silver just happening at new all-time highs. He took this screenshot from the comment section in his thing. I'll try and find it for you here. He says, I can't find uranium on Coinbase. So the truth is that there are opportunities to actually make money. And the truth is, for us, the good thing is that we can actually make money using our crypto money whilst the crypto markets aren't moving. We can trade on crypto exchanges, use our crypto assets to actually trade commodities. I don't know if you guys know this or whether you guys have seen this before, but like, for example, if you look at like one of our partners, which is 𝗏𝗏𝗡, did you know that you can trade gold on leverage on 𝗏𝗏𝗡? You can also trade silver. Oh yeah, I'll show you the silver chart over here. So you can actually also trade silver on leverage on Bitget and on 𝗏𝗏𝗡. You can trade copper on leverage on these exchanges. Also, when it comes to the bots, I don't know if you know, but Pionex, which has all these bots, has got gold bots, silver bots, etc., etc. So just wanted to show you that, you know what, there's always a bull market somewhere. Right now, the crypto markets seem to be like quite boring and not much happening. And that has to play out in time. In fact, it has to play out. It has to play out very, 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 very soon. Until then, there is a supermarket. There is a super cycle actually happening, and it's happening in commodities. And we can trade our commodities using the normal exchanges that we use. If you want to sign up and you want to trade these commodities, just go to. I'll show you here. Just go to the bottom of the video. If you want, there should be sign up links here for 𝗏𝗏𝗡, where you can actually trade commodities, and also all three of these exchanges. We'll put actually links to the actual commodities here. But you can actually trade the commodities. You can sign up and trade commodities, and you know each one of these exchanges has an offer. So I think for now, I think, you know, this Powell under attack thing, the market seems to be brushing it off as something of a nothing burger. I think that the market just want Powell out at the moment, and they want just Trump to get his way. And I don't think that there's a real risk. But in the meantime, the commodity super cycle is continuing, and we can trade the commodity super cycle basically using our crypto dollars. Great. Yeah, I think that's it for today. I mean, let me know what you think in the comments. Otherwise, see you guys again tomorrow. Don't forget, if you want to go and trade them, I actually bought like quite a bit of copper this morning, $300,000 worth of copper or something this morning on leverage on the exchange. But yeah, you can have a look. I'll put the links below. We'll change it. In a few seconds, we'll change the links so that you can actually see the actual links where you can actually go and trade. See you guys later. Until then, trade well, my friends.